Yo, what's good, Joe? Man, the Bigga P, and here to share my thoughts on the PBC and NBC card for us from last night. Um, this card has gotten quite a bit of attention, post-fight attention. Um, the fights themselves were, at most, they were entertaining and very watchable. A couple of comments before I actually really go into the fights, talking about the fights. Sugar Ray Leonard, love the guy. You know, he's one of the all-time greats. But please take him out of the booth, man. Like, it's one thing. It's one thing that you have Marv Abel, who probably hasn't really covered boxing all that much, or I don't even know has he really followed it since the '80s. But yeah, Sugar Ray, who I know has probably kept his eyes and ears to the sport, and just been phoning it in. Uh, PBC and NBC is definitely on that part. They need a complete haul over on their on the broadcast booth side. I mean, they need to take a page of either CBS or even Spike. As I said before, PBC on Spike it's still my overall favorite PBC card from top to bottom in terms of entertainment. Um, but with that being said, yeah, like Sugar Ray, like I said, you need to replace him to someone who's just not gonna phone it in and just say whatever, just there for the paycheck. Because I mean that it was kind of frustrating just to just hear him just do whatever. It was just this. You know, it seemed like he was just feeling anything. Um, so I mean that and pretty much that's my complaint. I know the entrances is still an issue. I mean they need to I mean, I know what it is because it's a network TV. So obviously, there are a couple of things that can't fly, like certain songs. You can't say the F bomb. You can't say anything like that on that show. So they have to be careful on what they actually pick or whatever. But it just seems like it's just so generic. It just doesn't seem like it just matches the fighter themselves. Um, so yeah, the actual fight. And also another thing too. Um, the swing bouts, the undercard. It would do L if he actually take a page out of Showtime. Like if he doesn't want to show us on the main card, cool. Show them before the big fights. I mean, all those fights because after the main fight, I did watch the Spence fight and but I actually missed the Diaz fight only because I wanted to go watch Salido and Martinez go to war. Um, this should have been. I mean, those fights should have just been before that. Like they should need to be, hey, like NBC Sports Extreme or something like that, and you can air those fights. And then afterwards, we could switch to NBC to go watch the two main cards. Because it was just like the card before, where they did the two main fights, and afterwards he had Namaris fight afterwards, finding a completely struggle fight after watching Guerrero and Thurman go at it, and I'm like this is like terrible. Like I'd rather put myself through that before the big fights rather than afterwards. So yeah, overall as a presentation, PBC on NBC just has a little bit more things to do, and I think also they got rid of the camera and everything like that, so it's all good. The fights themselves. The first fight was Peter Quillin versus Andy Lee. Originally, that was supposed to be for the WBO middleweight title. Everyone pretty much knows the story about this one. Quillin, who was the previous champion, gave up the belt and a $1.4 million payday. Um, for whatever reason, probably at the orders of Al, because I guess because Al doesn't want to work with Rock Sports and Rock Nation, and then there's a whole bunch of history between Al and Jay Z, so politics got in the way with that. But you're like wondering, like, hey, what was the actual plan behind it? Well, it turned out, I mean, Andy Lee would win that vacated title on HBO, and this was supposed to be his first title defense, and then all of a sudden you hear, bam, Quillen's about to face him again, and Quillin hadn't fought in a year. I mean, the last time he fought was on the undercard of Bernard Hopkins and Shumanov in a relatively dull fight with a guy who was facing vision problems. So he had a year off to do whatever, and what does he do? He comes in overweight. Was he like maybe I think he was like a pound and a half or 2 pounds overboard, and then afterwards he came way back in and he was still like point 0.6 over, point oh no, yeah, it was point 0.6 over. So it effectively turns this fight, that fight, into a championship fight. And I was already a little irritated at first because for a card that says Premier Boxing Champions, um, only 2 out of the 3 fighters themselves, you know, or 2 of the 3 fighters, now all the champions were not defending their titles. Lee kept this title by default, and then you have Swift and Peterson not defending their titles and fighting in a catchweight fight, which is completely some absolute bullshit to me. But so yeah, Quillin didn't make weight, and I think there was some issue before where he had regained. I think he wasn't supposed to rehydrate past 174, and he was like 176 or some shit like that. And I know there were threats like they may pull out the fight, which would hurt PBC's which would definitely hurt PBC's exposure. But I'm pretty sure some things in the background was taken care of. And like I said, I'm not surprised to see if Andy Lee probably made somewhere. I'm probably maybe close to $1 million between that and TV rights or whatever. I'm pretty sure the dude got well compensated for getting in the ring that night. And Quillin probably made probably was like what he made like a fourth of what he could have made in his comeback fight. Hey, that's what we call that Winky Wright School of Business. You just never know what fuels these type of decisions. But the fight itself was entertaining at times. The first early rounds, we were thinking that we were about to see an early round knockout when Quillin dropped Lee hard, and I do mean absolutely hard in the first round. The second knockdown that Quillin scored, though, however, that was a BS knockdown. That was a flash. That was not a knock. That was a knockdown where he's tangling the ropes. I didn't even think I even see a solid punch landed. But the punch that Lee landed, the knock point, that was the first time. That was as solid as anything. But pretty much you were watching these fights, and like all they were doing is they weren't setting up, they weren't throwing too many combinations, they weren't even going to the body. It was just more or less they were trying to set traps for each other to land their one-hitter quitters. And it made the fight very slow in places to actually really watch them. So it was a little slow in action, especially like in the middle rounds and such. And of course they did. I mean, in some rounds they turned it on at the end, but it was a chess match, but it was not it wasn't what I call an intelligent chess match. It was literally they were just fighting, just landing one big shot, no combinations, not even real work. Because it's like if either of them really seriously try to put in some combinations or put into the body, one of them would have won the fight. And it was like that. You had both of them, Lee and Quillin, keeping their hands low. I mean, they were ripe for counters for each other. And like I said, it got to the point where neither fighter did much to actually win or lose. I mean, it was pretty even, and that's why when it was announced as a split draw, I wasn't tripping on it because I was like, I mean, it seems about right. The only difference is now, like I said, Lee keeps his title, but I just don't think he's gonna keep that title for very long. Quillin, I don't know where his head is at, if he's even gonna stay at middleweight or if he's gonna go up to 168. But both of those, one thing that those two did is by proxy, pretty much strengthened the notion that Triple G is probably the best middleweight in boxing today. Unfortunately, he's not the lineal. He's not the man at 160. But it's feeling talks that Triple G can easily beat both of them. And like I said, I don't see Lee keeping his belt for very long. And Quillin is probably ripe for a defeat because you watch him. It's not like Quillin doesn't have any tools. Quillin has very impressive offensive tools. But he's just not a smart fighter. I mean, dude has explosive, dude has power, but he's just not a smart fighter. Like, there's no way that Lee should have gone out of the first 2 rounds. because he had Lee hurt. He had him ready to go. There was no way. But I guess, like I say, he was just a little bit too gun shy. And then the weight issues came into play because he started tiring near the end of the fight. Um, and Lee, like I said, Lee has the durability issues, not durable guy, and the leaky defense, horrifically leaky defense. I mean, you won in like I said. I mean, it wasn't like in the past two fights where he had to rescue himself with one shot to get out of the fight. Like I said, he's like, see, he'll make for exciting fights, but I just don't see him keeping that belt for very long. So, and then of course the main event was Danny Garcia versus Lamont Peterson. When this fight was announced, I'm like, finally, we're about to get some order in the 140 division. You got Danny with his WBC and the WBA belts, and you got Lamont, who, for whatever reason, it's been what, almost 4 years. He's held the belt since 2011, almost 4 years, like late 2011. He's still holding on to the IBF title. So I'm thinking to myself, when this fight is announced, and this is gonna be a network TV, I'm like, okay, cool. This is gonna be a unification, and I'm a big fan of unification. I think fighters should always try to unify the titles, try to beat all the champions in the divisions to see who's the best. And so when I heard that it was not going to be a unification, and two, it's going to be a catchweight fight, I was like, I was kind of pissed because it's like for Danny it'll be two catchweight fights in a row, and for Lamont it's just another fight where he goes in and it doesn't matter if he wins or loses, he keeps his belt. Now, from what I understand, the IBF said if he loses, that this belt was going to be a show. But I don't know if that's going to happen. Possibly, pretty much of what happened in this fight. I'm not the biggest fan of Danny Garcia. He's a tough kid. He's a tough, durable kid. But the one thing about him that I'm not a fan of is his boxing. Like, I just don't think he's a smart boxer or a really good boxer at all. Now, the Lucas fight was the fight I mean, at least was the one that first told me, okay, guys, he has a chin, he has durable, because pretty much any other fighter that took that type of punishment would have been diminished or would have been stopped. And then he goes fights Mauricio Herrera, which I believe he lost that so clear. It was a robbery. I think it was like I had him like 8-4, 9-3, that type of score. And then after that, he hasn't defended his 140 title properly since. He had the Rod Soccer fight, which is an absolute insult to my intelligence and to my, to my intelligence pretty much, because I'm like, I pay for Showtime for good fights. I don't pay to watch someone who I had never even heard of before. I mean, I had to go to BoxRec just to see who the hell he's even faced. He wasn't even on. He was on a show, and Soccer was on a show Extreme card. One of the few I just didn't watch. So, but yeah, regardless, yeah, he faced Soccer. He knocked him out in 2 rounds. And then afterwards he goes to this fight, and he did not look good. I mean, this was for all it talks about his power and everything like that. He was getting bullied around the ring by Lamont Peterson, of all people. Lamont Peterson, who has gotten knocked down by Tim Bradley legitimately, and who got wiped out by Lucas Matisse. I think he's also down too. With Khan and Victor Ortiz, I think those are the fights I remember him going down in. So this guy goes off his feet, and you're telling me that Danny Garcia cannot actually hurt this guy, not even once. Pretty much in the first half of the fight, and this is where it laid the foundation for what actually happened. Pretty much Peterson showed a movie that I didn't even think he even had anymore, because I was thinking Peterson was a good boxer, but I just didn't think his intangibles were strong enough to overcome Danny's intangibles, which was his size and strength and and his punching power. But he made Danny look absolutely foolish. I mean, pretty much it was just he literally outboxed the guy. I mean, Danny was just throwing nothing but air. I mean, he was touching absolutely nothing but air. And if you were going to score any rounds for Danny at this, depending on how you were looking, either you're looking at activity or you're looking at so you're looking at someone trying to put in work. This is where the arguments where this is where you probably would try to score a round or two or maybe three for Danny, because I think after the sixth round, uh, yeah, there was no way, and there was no way I had Danny winning any of those rounds, or maybe he may have won one round. And what's more telling too is in the last two rounds you can see Danny had gassed out, so Peterson went in to really try to finish him. To my knowledge, I mean this was crazy, and another thing too. Why Danny? I mean, there's no question in my mind. Danny probably cuts a shitload of weight, but Peterson actually entering that ring heavier than Danny was the surprise. He was 165. He was a super middleweight for crying out. Even though he didn't look like it to me, I mean, because Danny outside, when he's not trained, this actually looks like a big. He looks like a light heavyweight. Um, and just to see Lamont Peterson not even go on the verge of even going down or even stunned. I mean, he was taking Danny shots extremely well, and I couldn't believe that. I mean, this guy got knocked down by Tim Bradley of all people, and yet he's taking shots from Swift like it's nothing. Um, so yeah, Danny, and I saw him. He was he was just laying into it. I mean, you could tell Danny was getting hurt. I mean, Danny, half of his face was just marked up. This was Herrera. I mean, these are light. I mean, these are considerably light punches. I mean, well, no, Peterson is an average puncher. Herrera is considered a light puncher, and both of them have actually marked up Danny's face considerably. Well, Herrera broke Danny's nose. Um, so yeah, it was to the point where he's like Danny just had nothing. Like he couldn't avoid the jab. He couldn't cut off the ring on him. And, when Peterson was going circling, it was just beautiful movement. I mean, it's really all you need is just lateral movement and a jab to beat Danny Garcia. But the thing is but like I said, what caused Peterson the decision, and like I said, this is why I ended up as another majority decision. Is the fact that even though he was doing that, there were a couple rounds too where Peterson, well, he was doing what he was doing, but he just wasn't offensive enough to actually take the round like he should have. And of course, in boxing, you gotta take the title from the champion. So like I said, that's one viewpoint you want to look at. And most people would think, I mean, although Lamont, looked fresh. I mean, he looked like he was ready to go to the club afterwards, and do his thing, and you see that, and it's like, yes, I mean, yeah, he didn't take the rounds where he took off the belt. He took off the rounds off, but there was also rounds where he absolutely laid into Danny, and this wasn't, and this was a clear victory for him. So I didn't like seeing Lamont Lamont getting robbed like that, and I'm not a big Lamont Pearson fan. Since his title reign, but like I said, I thought he was a good fight. I thought he was a good boxer, but I didn't think he would I didn't think he would do this and put on pretty much the best performance of his career. So yeah, my overall thoughts is they gotta run that fight back. Like don't put it on PBC. Like put it on a card. Like let's just say if Pac and Floyd have depending on what happens on May 2nd, have a rematch, throw that fight on there and throw it at welterweight. Well, in the meanwhile, throw that welterweight. In the meanwhile, too, it's clear that even making the catch weight fight is starting to take a toll on Danny. So what they need to do, they need to get those belts off him. Like if Danny's not gonna do what he's gonna do and make 140, get those belts off him, strip him, and let him go to welterweight. But this fight has shown me more than anything that Danny is food at welterweight. Because some of those cats at welterweight, with the exception of maybe Pac and Floyd Mayweather, some of the smaller ones that have actually moved up, like him, like Danny did, they're facing guys that do rehydrate in the 160s, and Danny doesn't have the boxing skills to avoid those type of to avoid punches from them. He will be food at welterweight. I fully believe that. In contrast to Lamont, who I never even thought of him as a welterweight. Lamont actually looks like he'd actually be competitive there, very competitive. Um, Surprisingly. So, but like I said, if they're gonna run that back, let them run it back at welterweight, and in the meanwhile, try to figure out like, how to get those belts off Swift because like he's clearly not he can't make 140 anymore, and it's getting to the point where you can't just go a year without defending your titles in that division. So, strip them, do whatever, give them up. Somebody has to give up those belts. Um, so yeah, those are my thoughts on those two fights. And like I said, I just wish after that fight I was getting ready to turn over to go watch the Salida Martinez card. But then they started airing the Spence fight, which is the only fight that I actually watched, and pretty much it was just exercise. It was a sparring session for him. Spence could be the future, but they need to now really they need to up his competition. Throw him on a future PBC card, um, if needed. He needs to. It's time for him to up his competition. Find a notable fighter, a notable journeyman, or some sort of a fringe contender that he could face. And I think if he's operating, I think he's. Because I know he was at 154. I think he's at 147 now. Yeah, he's ready. He's ready for a fight with a notable fighter. I did not see the Felix Diaz fight only because, like I said, at that time I really wanted to go watch Salido Martinez. So that's probably the only fight that I need to go probably later on in the evening, and I'm gonna try to find it on YouTube or whatever and watch it. So yep. So and before I go, or those are my thoughts on the PBC NBC card. And then before I actually sign off, because I'm gonna try to enjoy this beautiful weather we're having. It's like 60 something degrees outside. It's like in the high 60s. And I want to talk briefly about 3 other fights that I didn't do a video for. The first one was, of course, congratulating Gary Russell for knocking out Johnny Gonzalez because I'm a fan of Gary Russell. So seeing him actually being able to put together and learning from his loss to Lomachenko, that was a great moment to watch him, and he pretty much dusted him off in 4 rounds. Um, like I said, featherweight is currently one of my favorite divisions to watch because you got Gary Russell, you got Nicholas Walters, you got Gradovich, and you got Lomachenko. All 4 of them are distinct in styles and such, and hopefully some uniform. And unlike other divisions, 122, they seem to actually want to fight each other, and try who's the best, who's the best out of the 4. So remains to be seen. Beterbiev versus Campillo. It was exercise. Campillo didn't recover from the first knockdown, and literally it was just target practice until Beterbiev put out the lights in 5, and and it was in cold blooded fashion. That left hook like pretty much grazed him on the chin, but he already knew that he scored that home run punch and just walked off just slowly as Campillo was going to the counter. That was cold blooded, you know. But he still needs seasoning though, because I can't forget about the previous fight in which he was getting outboxed and he got dropped. Um, so I mean, I know they're gonna try to speed him through to a fight with Kovalev, or maybe Stevenson. Actually, I can't really see a Stevenson fight. But yeah, they need to. I know Beterbiev. I mean, he's definitely. I could see him definitely. He's going to be on another PBC card at some point this year. Now Stevenson versus Bigga. Now this was Stevenson's time to actually try to impress to see where because Stevenson Kovalev is still the money fight at 175. So you're trying to see what he has left. Bigga, however, how Bigga got his shot, I don't know. You lose your 168 title, and bam, you're facing the Kingpin at 175. I don't understand it, unless Heyman just needed a body who wasn't overly dangerous. But I mean, Stevenson won. I mean, Stevenson pretty much. There were times where. There were times where you're like, you want, hey, man, like you have other punches, not just your left hand. Throw some combinations, vary up your punches. Because if he did that, he could have gotten Bigga out of there. But Bigga just being what he is, being a tough guy, took him to 12 rounds. But at least in this fight, Stevenson actually looked like he probably did train hard for this fight, so his cardio looked like it was good. But now what Stevenson needs to do now is to be more active. Um, so we don't have any other repeats of the Fonfara fight. So yeah, I mean the cards from that last PBC card out of Canada, they were good fights. They were excellent, entertaining fights. So yep. So that's about it for today. I'm pretty sure next week I'll be talking. I'm pretty sure I have something to say, especially when you have Ruslan versus Matisse, and then you have Delorme versus Crawford, and then you have the return of Chavez Jr. Versus Fanfara. So yeah, I'll definitely most likely have a video for that and my comments for those. So till next time, peace.